and this is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. And I want to jump into the topic of the day. The big topic around the world, obviously, is President Biden's decision to not pursue reelection and his support of Kamala Harris, his vice president, as the candidate for the Democratic Party for president. That, in addition to some recent Supreme Court decisions, and both the assassination and the illness, the COVID illness of President Biden, made the past 10 days tumultuous, to say the least. I'm joined by colleagues and friends, and I'm putting them as co-hosts today. Dean Burnell Powell, who joins us from, I believe he's in the Carolinas, or maybe he's in Kansas City, I'm not sure which, today. And my colleague and friend Yusef from Genie, who I know is in St. Paul. Dean Burnell and Yusef, brothers, how y'all doing?
Doing well here in South Carolina. I'm in the city of South Carolina.
Okay. Well, and Yusef, how are you doing? Unmute, Yusef. Unmute. Yusef is muted, so he's not hearing my note here. Burnell, let me ask you to weigh in. This past week, okay, Yusef, you're unmuted now. How are you doing, Yusef?
Good. Thank you for asking, brother. Thank you. Hello, Burnell. Now Burnell is muted.
What's that now?
Now we hear you. Trying to get our microphones synchronized here. Well, listen, gentlemen, let's talk about this political week. Burnell, you first, if you would. Just how would you describe what's happened in the past 10 days and the impact? I'm looking at it from my vantage point as both a news person, but as a Democrat and as a person that supported Democratic politics and had vision and hope that there'd be a progression towards the elevation of Kamala Harris at some point in time. But things have accelerated. What are your thoughts about what's happened in the past week?
I'm one of those who follow good public relations advice, which is start out where you want to end up. And when after President Biden's unfortunate presentation during the debate was I did not watch, but that's another conversation. It was clear to me that eventually he was going to have to decide. And it was not clear to me exactly what the process was going to be. But since he had for months been campaigning and been unable to move the polls in his direction in a meaningful way, it became pretty clear to me that the next step was that he was going to have to find a way to step aside. Thinking about another political bit of advice, never let a crisis go to waste. I thought that what he would do would take advantage of the crisis that he found himself in and simply declare that the cold that he was experiencing was not responding properly to medical treatment and use that as an easy way of stepping aside. He didn't do that. Then came the shooting, and then came the COVID crisis. So that three crises, almost as though fate was saying, hey, there are some opportunities here to go in a different direction. He eventually did read the writing on the wall. I would assume listened to his friends and political advisors and saw that the way out under these circumstances was simply to step aside and let Harris proceed in his stead. I had thought that I had offered that one way out might have been for both he and Harris to step aside. He could have named her as his vice president and he could have gotten out of the picture completely. Now, I do want to underscore, I'm saying all of this as someone who's simply observing politics, not as a commentary on Joe Biden, who I think has been an excellent president and will go down in history as certainly among the top 10 greatest presidents that we've had, maybe much higher than that. But directly to the point of where this all has left me with her elevation and watching the parties unite around her is with the feeling of, first of all, being sad that Biden had to depart, but then being immediately overwhelmed, almost overjoyed wave of good fortune that this means for the Democratic Party, and more importantly than that, for the nation, because I think that Biden understood what I have believed all along. This election is not about Joe Biden. It's not about the Democratic Party. It is about the question of whether we will continue to operate as a democracy in this country. Everything is in place for some sort of autocratic operation to take hold and to hold on to the country for only God knows how long that can happen. We've seen it happen in other nations right now. Just within the last few weeks, France managed to dodge a bullet. Immediately thereafter, French commentators were saying basically what happened was that after the first round of voting, everything was bad. It looked like the fascists were coming to power. And then France remembered. It remembered why it was that they had rejected fascism in the first place. And it seemed to me that we were on that kind of trajectory too. Indeed, we're still on that kind of trajectory. And the question is, will we remember? Will we remember why we fought the fascists and the Nazis? Will we remember what is going on over the last decade in places like Turkey and Poland and Hungary? Will we take into consideration what a truly authoritarian dictatorship looks like when we look at the Russians and how they operate? We are staring down the barrel of a gun here, and the nation has to decide now: do we continue with the great experiment, or do we turn our back on it?
Yusef, what do you think? What's your feeling, your impression?
Well, I agree completely with what everything that Burnell said. The president found himself in a number of fights. He was fighting a cold. He was fighting the backlash from a poor debate performance. He was fighting the Republican Party's endorsed candidate. He was fighting, of late, the pit bull vice presidential Republican candidate. He was fighting the media because the calls for him to resign almost seemed to become a fait accompli, Al, in terms of the infighting within the Democratic Party, which the Republican Party and candidates were simply cheering about. And finally, he was fighting COVID and decided that the best thing to do for the Democrats, for the country, for the election, and for democracy was to step aside, to endorse Kamala Harris, to release the $240 million which remained in the presidential campaign war chest. Kamala has also raised more than $100 million in the last 24 hours. There was a critical need to catch up with the fundraising that the Republican campaign had initiated. Elon Musk had pledged $45 million a month to the Trump campaign. And the Democratic Party sort of had its panties in a bunch about what the best way was to defeat Donald Trump. And so Kamala Harris has now secured enough delegates to obtain the endorsement at the Democratic National Convention. She's received support from more than a dozen national unions. The only one we're waiting on is the American Auto Workers. And both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were on the picket lines with United Auto Workers when the Republican candidate for president said, let the auto companies go bankrupt. Let's not concede to their demands. So the big discussion now is about who would be the running mate. And among those under consideration are Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar. There are two schools of thought. One is that having two females on the ticket might exaggerate any sexism, and some are saying that Hillary Clinton, of course, apart from bad campaign strategy, enjoyed negative results as related to sexism in her campaign for presidency. Kamala, obviously being a woman, being Afro-Caribbean Indian, not an African-American woman, and being vice president, which is an invisible job somewhere, behind the Wizard of Oz, not just behind the curtain, but behind the man who is behind the curtain. And now she's center stage, but her experience as a prosecutor, as a district attorney, as attorney general for the state of California, certainly prepares her for coming up against a woman abuser, a rapist, a person who's, committed 34 felony crimes and been convicted, and convicted of fraud and a number of other charges. So the two questions are, how will Kamala do on the campaign trail, and who will she select as her vice presidential candidate? And the odds are that the strong favorites are a representative from the swing states that Kamala has to carry. She could win the popular vote, meaning that she could win a larger number of individual votes than President Trump and still lose the election because of electoral votes. And electoral votes are assigned to states individually. And if you don't achieve a majority of the electoral votes, I think 270 to win the election, then you cannot, attain the White House. So the Democratic National Committee, the Governors Association, the Democratic Campaign for the Presidency is concerned about those swing states because at present, Trump has an average of 1.5 percentage point lead over former, candidate Biden in all of those swing states except one. In another, there is a tie. And he has, in the brief polls that have been conducted since President Biden stepped aside and endorsed her, a 1.5 percentage point lead over Kamala Harris as of this moment in time. But we all know that polls don't vote, and they are just that, a momentary snapshot in time. So the one thing that there is bipartisan agreement about is that this campaign is going to be one of the ugliest in history. And the next 3 months are going to tell who will become the next president of the United States. I would conclude by saying that in no one's imagination can they recall the euphoria and the excitement about the nomination of Kamala Harris, about her being endorsed by Joe Biden and being the Democratic frontrunner. And no one has come out to challenge her directly, although Dean Phillips, representative from Minnesota, Robert Kennedy Jr., are saying that they would like to see some type of open process. But she already has the endorsement sewn up in terms of delegates that have committed to Biden and now to her. So J.D. Vance, the Republican vice presidential candidate, made a number of sexist and ugly statements in an attack on Kamala Harris this morning.
Mhm.
So any notion of the tone of the campaign following the attempted assassination of Mr. Trump have just gone out the window. And the campaign has already gotten ugly and vicious, and we suspect that that will get worse in the days to come. Here's the real trick, Al. We got to get out to vote,
That's
okay?
it.
And we need to get out the vote that we got out for Barack Obama, term 1 and term 2. We need to get out the vote that we did for Keith Ellison and all of the Democratic candidates in the state of Minnesota. And my Democratic friends are saying, I don't care what you do as long as you vote blue. And the concern is not just, this is not a race for president. This is a race for control and the future of democracy. Because we're talking about the House, we're talking about the Senate, we're talking about state and local and county elections up and down the ballot. There are
And
people running,
and
and
we're
those
talking
people
about the
who are
impact
elected are going to have
of
an
these
impact
decisions
on our lives, whether we like it or not.
and the impact on the judiciary. Dean Powell,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
judiciary consequences were apparent in recent days. Would you go into what's happened with the judiciary, particularly around the throwing out of the prosecution's cases against Trump?
Well, only 1% of the cases that are appealed go through.
Let me go to
appeals
Burnell
court.
on that, Yusef. Hold on
I'm
a
sorry.
second. Yeah.
Go ahead, bro.
I was just about to add to that list that Yusef so eloquently laid out. This is also a fight for the Supreme Court. The Republican Party made a mission of remaking the Supreme Court. And when when Trump ran, one of the things that he did was that he turned to the Federalist Society, uh, a, uh, a, a right-wing organization that is
Super right.
committed to creating a different view of the Constitution and our laws in this country. And he asked them to give him the names of people who he could nominate who would be who could be counted upon to overturn Roe v. Wade. And regrettably, Donald Trump succeeded in that. And not only did he succeed in overturning Roe v. Wade, but also succeeded in overturning the Chevron rule. Basically, I don't want to get too technical here, but basically an opinion which says that it is the obligation of the court to defer to the executive branch when making interpretations of what the laws mean that govern those executive agencies. After all, we're nothing about environmental sciences or technological questions or what have you. The agencies are the ones who have that authority. So now that that has been, now that Chevron has been overturned, now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and most recently, now that the court has, out of whole cloth, invented a notion that the president of the United States is above the law, a notion that flies in the face of any seriously considered positions that legal scholars have had for the 300 years of the Republic. The stage is now set for a very authoritarian government to take hold, one in which the president would not be answerable to the court for the most part, for anything that the president did that was arguably within the president's constitutional power. And that will simply make it almost impossible to rein in the next president, unless that president is prepared to rein themselves in. So again, we're sitting at a point now which is very dangerous for the nation, and extremely dangerous for those within the nation, like myself, who have over years, for years, espoused views that are totally anathema to the Republican Party and its life.
And so you're saying that the environment for us going forward is really a threatened environment, that the forces of retribution and of coercion are in effect at the point of release that could cause a sea change. And
Well, we quote Donald Trump when he says, "I am your retribution." Retribution against what and against whom? We know that Donald Trump has not been reluctant to point out who he views as his enemies. They are anyone who disagrees with him, and in particular, women and people of color.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane.